On point one is on the secret behind the all-weather friendship between President Putin and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. On point two is on Air Force Chief AP Singh's revelation on India downing F-16 jets during Operation Sindhu, along with a warning to Pakistan. And now let's take a quick look at the headlines. Madras High Court forms SIT to probe Karur stampede after TVK blames Tamil Nadu police for stampede and inadequate security at the rally venue. Health Ministry issues advisory on pediatric cough syrups after child deaths in Madhya Pradesh, advises rational and sparing use. Patiala House Court sends Delhi Baba Chaitanyananda to 14-day judicial custody in sexual harassment case. NE says brutalities on protesters in Pakistan occupied Kashmir are horrific and Islamabad must be held accountable. Akshay Kumar shares cybercrime scare, says stranger asked his 13-year-old daughter for nude pictures. Four killed in Andhra floods, CM Chandrababu Naidu announces ex gratia. Israel intercepts last Gaza flotilla boat, begins deportations. Kantara Chapter 1 creates history at the box office. Rishabh Shetty's film collects rupees 60 crore on day one. Ahead of his visit to India in December, Russian President Vladimir Putin displayed his strong support for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and underlined the strategic depth of India-Russia relations, even as the US ramps up pressure on New Delhi over its energy ties with Moscow. Putin said Russia will import more agricultural and medical products to offset India's losses because of the tariffs imposed by Trump-led US administration. Calling Modi a wise leader who thinks first about his country, Putin expressed confidence that India would not yield to Western pressure. Describing the India-Russia relationship as special, Putin said Russia and India have never had any problems or tensions between them and always took actions by keeping in view each other's sensitivities.
Our relations with India are of special nature ever since the Soviet Union and since the days where the Indian people fought for their independence. India knows, remembers, appreciates that. And we appreciate the fact that India never forgets that. And so our relations are developing. I believe we will celebrate 15 years since our announcement of the specialized, strategic, privileged partnership. And India and Russia never had any issues of interstate nature, any differences. Prime Minister Modi is a very reasonable, wise leader. He's very oriented in the interests of his nation.
Speaking at the International Valdai Discussion Forum, President Putin highlighted Russian uranium export to the US despite energy sanctions. He noted that America, while pressuring partners like India with threats of tariffs for purchasing Russian oil, continue to buy Russian uranium for its nuclear industry even after the US formally enacted a ban in 2024. Putin called out Washington's double standards. The US seeks cheap Russian nuclear fuel while telling India and others to stop Russian energy imports to face new tariffs. Despite sanctions rhetoric, Russia supplied around 20% of American nuclear fuel in 2024-25 with contracts worth $1.2 billion. Putin predicted that tariff threats and restrictions would ultimately raise US prices, disrupt global trade, and damage relationships with self-respecting nations like India.
if India stops buying our energy, damage will be inflicted upon them, like to $9 to $10 billion if they decline to buy energy from us. If not, high duties will be imposed on them, and once again, damage will be there. Well, the same amount of damage. And why then decline to buy Russian energy to actually sustain political risks? And the Indian people will look at what decisions are made by the political leadership and never accept any humiliation.
Countries like China, United States and Russia itself have alternated between being each other's friends and enemies in the last 70 years. But India-Russia relationship has been rock solid. Let's look at how the India-Russia relationship has developed historically. India and Russia developed diplomatic relations in 1947, soon after independence. During the Cold War, India adopted a non-aligned outlook. However, Soviet Union was a key ally in countering Western influence. Till 1991, erstwhile Soviet Union demonstrated unwavering support during India's critical movements. It helped India in 1971 war. In 1971, India and Soviet Union signed the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation. USSR used its veto power at least 6 times between 1957 and 1971 at the UN Security Council to support India, especially on the Kashmir issue. During his visit to India in October 2000, President Putin initiated the India-Russia annual summit process. In 2010, this partnership was elevated to a special and privileged strategic partnership. Over 60% of India's conventional military hardware originates from Russian platforms. We have purchased aircrafts, tanks, submarines, missile systems worth 80 billion from Russia since 1947. More than one-third of India's defense imports between 19 and 23 have been from Russia. The major systems supplied include Su Mk1 jets, S-400s, T-90 tanks, Talwar class frigates, Mi series helicopters, amongst others. In recent times, India's defense imports have marginally shifted away from the reliance on Russia to diversify towards France, United States of America and even Israel. The shift reflects India's effort to diversify its defense sources while also developing its domestic defense industry. However, there is a fundamental difference. America does not transfer technology to India, while Russia has no such qualms and has been doing so for decades. Also, in the geopolitical realm, Russia has backed India with support for India's UNSC permanent seat bid, even as America's cooperation has been through regional groupings like Quad in the Indo-Pacific. Now, if we look at the trade ties, India is the second largest buyer of the Russian oil after China, and Moscow accounts for almost 40% of the country's energy imports. While two-way trade reached a record high of 68.7 billion in 24-25, India's exports were valued at only 4.88 billion. Indian officials have expressed concern at the trade imbalance and called on Moscow to do more to diversify the trade basket and improve access to Russian markets. India and Russia have set a target of 100 billion in trade by 2030, including the use of national currencies to circumvent Western sanctions. There are a number of underlying reasons that India-Russia relationship has withstood the test of time and has gone from strength to strength. Russia's role in India's nuclear program, including many nuclear power plants like Kudankulam, submarines on lease like INS Chakra, strategic partnership on tech, are few that I am mentioning. Russians have shared critical technology, relationship is time tested, it exists at cultural and social level too. Russians have supported India in times of war and important international situations. On this issue, I am joined by Julia Melenkova, Program Manager, Russian International Affairs Council. Thank you so much. He joins me from Moscow. Ambassador Jain Das Gupta, former ambassador to WTO, and Professor Swaran Singh, Center for International Studies. Thank you so much. I had to give a long introduction to put everything in perspective because Indo-US relationship has already been discussed in length in terms of trade, in terms of diversification of the relationships in 1991. But straight away to you, Julia, as my TV forward to this program was Pakki Dosti Ka Raaz, the secret behind this friendship. So what is the secret behind this friendship, time-tested friendship?
Well, that's actually a very good question because international relations are no less of a relations as social relations. So we always confront this question of how to make them sustainable and how to make them really like friendly, trustful, and so on and so forth. But I think that you already named the secret yourself. And this is the thing that President Putin numerously returns to while speaking on India. And this is exactly the absence of any historical disagreements or wars or conflicts between Russia and India, the absence of any border conflicts and border disputes between Russia and India, and also the really good track record that the Soviet Union and India had during the 20th century. So after India gained independence, Soviet Union supported this movement. And also, I believe we can even look back into history further and reflect upon how important was the legacy of Lev Tolstoy for the Indian governance. So like here, I believe Russia and India share a lot in terms of culture, in terms of this very culture of trust, culture of mutual respect. And this is what brings the relationship forward.
Okay. Okay. Before I go to Ambassador Jain Das Gupta, Professor Swaran Singh, is there any other ingredient to this friendship that I have missed putting out, sir?
I think it's also largely ideological overlap or complementarity, and we will soon be completing 100 years of Jawaharlal Nehru's first visit to Soviet Union in winter of 1927. Which was 10th anniversary of Bolshevik Revolution. And I agree with both you and Julia, fundamentally because we haven't had any fundamental problems in bilateral relations. We have often been seen as very useful to each other. In fact, in 50s, when India was extremely dependent on United States, Nehru had made another visit in 1955 to Soviet Union, which laid foundations which was carried forward by his daughter, leading to August 1971 friendship agreement with Soviet Union that really laid it thick, all the way to Manmohan Singh in 2010 starting a special and privileged, comprehensive and privileged strategic partnership, to Prime Minister Modi having met already President Putin 22 times and looking forward in December, early December, for their 23rd meeting in Delhi. And I think that together sets the stage as on 1st of this month, US tariffs shot up to 100% in some sectors in terms of branded and registered pharma, furniture and heavy trucks. In that backdrop and looking forward to setting the stage for his early December visit, the detailed comment that President Putin made showcasing his chemistry and bonhomie with both India as a nation and a society and also Prime Minister, I think set the stage in that sense. And I understand PTI is reporting that he's already instructed his officials to lay down strategies to smoothen this problem of trade balance and how to reach to their set target of $100 billion of trade by 2030, which is how they are saying that we will start by importing from India more of pharma goods and also agricultural products and so on. So I think it's a very positive swing and positive mood that seeks to offset the negative impact of tensions with the United States.
Ambassador Das Gupta, your opening comments?
Well, I think the US, if you set apart, what has happened in the recent past, India and Russia, and before that the Soviet Union, have had a very balanced relationship throughout. There were never any ruffles, never disagreements, and Soviet Union and then the Russians have stood by us solidly in any international conflict in which they had to take sides. Even in the 1962 war with China, of course, the Russians, the Soviet Union maintained neutrality, but they made statements which were critical of China, and they also stopped the aid for nuclear energy to China. So the Russians have been solid friends, trustworthy, reliable, and just by way of mentioning, in the 1971 war, when the US threatened India with sending the US 7th Fleet to the Bay of Bengal, and to invade India, if we can believe the news reports. The Russians sent their submarines and they surfaced ahead of the US 7th Fleet. And after that, I think the ships of the US Navy, they turned around and went back. So that is the kind of support that we have had. India is one of the few countries to have the privilege of being, sold these S-400 systems. Of course, Turkey is another one, and China is another one. So that has helped us immensely in, fending off the attacks from the Pakistanis in the recent clash. So, and now the stage is set for cooperation at a much deeper level in terms of joint production or co-production of Su-57 if we were to opt for this fighter jet, because the Russians have also indicated, perhaps at an unofficial level, that they will be prepared to share the source code also of this. So the cooperation that India and Russia have enjoyed over the years, that is only deepening, and the bedrock of that is trust.
Ambassador Dasgupta, in 70s and 60s and 80s, Soviet Union was a rival to the United States of America. China was not in the picture. Today, China is a major power, and Russia comes across, if I may use the word, if not subservient, but as a smaller power. Does it complicate the issue?
Well, I think it is also a question of synergies or sharing common interests,
partnerships,
the conflating of interests, because the Russians also are not very comfortable with China on many issues, and they feel that they will get overwhelmed by the Chinese if they don't stand up. So they would also like to have India by their side, as would the Americans. Why are the Americans quoting us in the name of the Quad? Because they want to have India on their side. It is a similar case with Russia, but this has emerged only in the past 20 years or so. Before that, the Russians, extended their support to India without any conditions.
Yeah, generally the discussion on India-Russia relationship takes place from the New Delhi's perspective, Indian perspective or Indian expectations. What are the Moscow expectations in context of the relationship between two countries? If I reverse the gaze.
That's the question to me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I would actually agree with Ambassador Dasgupta here as regards China and Russia's expectations to kind of create a safer space for itself in Eurasia, just in case it starts getting overwhelmed with the Chinese presence in Eurasia. But Russia also has a more ambitious goal, the way it sets this goal for itself. And this is creating this new space of greater Eurasian partnership in order to avoid the conflicts in Eurasia similar to those in Europe, because the previous Cold War dynamics that Russia had, Soviet Union had with the US, created this understanding that any rivalry between great powers should necessarily lead to some conflictual zones, as it was in Europe. And Russia wants to prevent the same dynamics in Eurasia, which is why for Russia it is now extremely important to have good relationship and develop good relationship both with China and India, regardless of their interstate dynamics. Like taking that into account, but not intervening into this China-India dynamics, but having them both at the table while discussing the regional security in Eurasia.
Absolutely. Professor Swing, with a resurgent China and a Russia bogged down in war in Ukraine, do you think that this can affect the contours of India-Russia relationship in future?
I think, first of all, let's understand that Russia has its own vantage points and there is a complementarity in the relationship. There is no doubt, as you said, in last 3 decades, China has emerged as an economic powerhouse, and that really is a lure that Russia would have in terms of ensuring that China continues to buy Russian energy. India is another emerging, in fact, second and fourth largest economy. China and India, Russia would like to keep them, in good stead in that sense. But remember, Russia also has enormous edge over not just India but also China in terms of defense technologies, in terms of nuclear technologies, in terms of energy that it can supply to both these rapidly, emerging two economies, which will be dependent on imported energy for a long period of time. So there is a complementarity definitely there. But it's also true that, yes, with the sudden economic rise of China, leading also to a certain amount of military modernization, China has become inordinately little more influential. And in that fact, one also sees India's interest in staying with Russia so that, otherwise Russia will become much more vulnerable, as you mentioned, to being a junior partner of China. In fact, if India constantly stands with Russia, that is allowing Russia to balance relationship between China and India. And of course, India and China are also going to gain advantages of importing not just Russian energy, but also potentially access to their rather advanced nuclear and defense technologies. So I understand that there is a drift in the equations between these three countries, but there is a strong complementarity between the three as of now. I think that is what sustains them. And the fact that all three have now very seasoned, very powerful, very ambitious leaders, their personal chemistry also adds up to how they want to stand together, to what extent they want to stand together, in what areas they want to stand together. And in that sense, the no-limit partnership of Moscow and Beijing is already set in sort of stone. India keeps that option of balancing between Western nations' engagement and engagement with China and Russia as of now. The recent tensions, in fact, have encouraged China and Russia to showcase India drifting towards their fold, but India has so far tried to maintain that maneuverability on both sides, but sees its relationship with both Moscow and Beijing as very significant part of growing into a developed nation by 2047.
Ambassador Gupta, that may become a tough call. Let me be the devil's advocate here, sir, because India also enjoys a deep and beneficial relationship with a lot of European countries. With the hybrid warfare expanding from Ukraine to the Baltic states, the balance, India will need to do more of a balancing act. Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, Denmark. Ambassador Dasgupta.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question fully.
My question was that,
it,
my question is that India is also deeply invested in the European countries. For example, Estonia, Latvia, Finland, Scandinavia, Denmark. And there's a expanding grey zone warfare, something which China does with Taiwan. So there has to be a lot of balancing act on part of India to do there, because the Russian state is doing that.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go on.
Yeah. Okay. I think as far as Western Europe, and parts of the earlier Soviet Union are concerned, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the Finland, Denmark, Sweden, the Scandinavian countries, I don't think the Russians have any territorial ambitions there. And to my mind, and Russia has reiterated this times without number, as have international experts like Professor Jeffrey Sachs. It is basically the saber rattling of NATO and its expansionism that has led to this Russia-Ukraine war. Of course, the Ukrainians have suffered in a major way, and that is regrettable. But without the Western Europeans, keeping pressure on Ukraine to continue with its fight against the Russians, I think this war could have resulted in a negotiated settlement a long time ago. And that is what Henry Kissinger had also mentioned right at the very outset in February 2022. So, of course, India will support sovereignty, whether it is Denmark or Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Poland, or any other country which have been mentioning that they have sighted drones and intrusions by Russian aircraft, which have not been established. Evidence has not been, adduced for that.
Absolutely.
So India will never support any expansion of the field of conflict into new areas.
Thank you, all of you. I think these are times when things are changing quickly. There has been a breakthrough. Taliban foreign minister is going to be in India this month. Direct flights between Beijing and New Delhi are going to start. There might be a meeting of Prime Minister Modi with Trump, the sidelines of the ASEAN, and President Putin is going to be in India by end of this year. So a lot of things on plate, and we will be following them throughout. So this was on point 1. Please don't go away, because on point 2, we will talk about Air Chief AP Singh's revelations about F-16 jets downed by India during Operation Sindoor, but after a short break.
Alakazam fish disappear.